The effects of ground-level ozone on children with asthma, an analysis of ambient ozone and its correlation with asthma-related hospitalizations in children. According to the Center for Disease Control, 1 in 11 children have asthma, which is roughly 7 million children nationwide. Despite the many ways to combat and control asthma, the prevalence and new incidents of childhood asthma, especially, have been increasing over the years. So what exactly is asthma?
Asthma is a chronic lung condition in which one has difficulty breathing due to the inflammation of airways during a response that is known as an asthma attack. Asthma attacks are a sudden onset of symptoms that elicit the muscles around the airways to tighten, causing the opening to become narrow. Asthma attacks happen upon inhalation of substances which elicit a cascade of immunologic responses in the body, one of them being the inflammation and narrowing of the airways. One substance which we decided to research independently is ground-level ozone. But what exactly is ground-level ozone? Ground-level ozone occurs from the reactions of VOCs, NOx, and oxygen. How does this relate to children with asthma? Previous studies have correlated increased ground-level ozone with an increase in hospitalizations in children with asthma being the primary diagnosis. In fact, emergency room visits occurred 28% more frequently when average ozone levels were above 60 parts per billion. The World Health Organization recommends a maximum exposure threshold of 50 to 60 parts per billion, indicating that New Jersey is in non-compliance with the leading World Health governing body's suggestions, even with an improving trend over the last 20 years. We have quantified the changes in ozone since 1985 to understand how ozone will change in the future. The Japanese reanalysis dataset was used to examine ground-level ozone concentrations between 1985 and 2015 to determine trends in national and regional ground-level ozone levels. The following map is the climatological ozone average for the United States. As expected, Southern California is the ozone capital of the United States, with the eastern half of the United States towards New York City, a frequent competitor for most dangerous ozone conditions. There are many factors that go into this. Ozone concentrations change in conjunction with three variables. The first is background emissions in a particular point, so carbon fuel use, automobile emissions, and anything that emits VOCs or nitrous oxides. Due to this factor, cities are notorious for high ozone levels. The second is advection due to the wind. The westerly winds present in the mid-latitudes mean that if you are east of a metropolitan area, you are downstream of the greatest ozone production and will most likely experience elevated ozone levels.
The following animation demonstrates how easterly winds can lock in ozone into a metropolitan area for long periods of time.
The third factor is a very important factor which allows for the ozone reaction to occur. This is temperature or sunlight. Higher temperatures and greater sunlight favor the production of ozone. This background allows one to account for the temporal changes in ozone.
Between 1985 and 2015, ozone has been decreasing according to the green trend line. While this sounds like good news, there is still significant interannual variability, which brings large portions of the nation into non-compliance with healthy standards of ozone. Regulations in the mid-1980s demonstrated how short-term success in the reduction of ozone is often followed by large spikes upward, mainly dictated by economic factors, whereas cheap gasoline leads to more automobile emissions of the components that lead to the formation of ozone. Temperature is a main driver of the interannual variability in ozone concentrations. As has been concluded by the IPCC and is represented in this dataset, the global average mean surface temperature is increasing significantly into the 21st century, turning relatively mild emissions concentrations into dangerous ozone environments. The following figure shows nitrogen oxide emissions over the past 40 years, showing great improvements in emissions, but there's still work to be done. If rises in temperature occur at the same rate as in the last 30 years, ozone concentrations will continue to stagnate despite decreasing emissions. In fact, different emission scenarios exist, depending on how optimistic you are about the future. Sheffield et al. 2011 used a fairly optimistic emissions projection and still found that annual levels of ozone in New York City would increase between 2.7 to 5.3 parts per billion in the New York City metropolitan area. A morbidity analysis was performed, and given past correlations with ozone and asthma emergency room visits, these future concentrations would lead to a 7.3% increase in asthma pediatric emergency department visits from 2005 to the 2020s. It simply isn't enough to tell someone with asthma to move to a location where ozone concentrations will be better. We have determined that current reductions in ozone and regulations are not enough to prevent children from developing asthma through exposure to ozone. Awareness of this issue is of utmost importance, as there are many initiatives which seek to eradicate the issue through regulations and individual actions.